Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is another edition of the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North, Friday, August 4th. And as is usually the tradition on our Friday show, we try to break out of the usual format and not dwell simply on the news of the day and talk about some of the bigger picture things that have been happening. And for this one, we actually have to go back to almost a decade when the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too movement, emerged and became one of the most powerful cultural forces that I have ever seen, in the sense that it took down people who were titans of their fields, people who were on the top of the world, and were taken down in many cases in a long overdue way. People that had been getting away with absolutely horrible things over time. But as with anything else, we also saw a little bit of mission creep, and the line between someone who was a date rapist and someone who simply had an awkward encounter on a date got blurrier and blurrier. And we saw in the Me Too movement people who were casualties of this cultural tidal wave that really were not villains. And as a result, we have still, I think, a lot of questions that have been left unanswered about which justice was correctly meted out and which justice was not. Well, one of the biggest names that was taken down in the Me Too era was Kevin Spacey, an actor who, at the time the allegations against him were made, and there were many of them, he was really on the top. He was starring in that Netflix movie or Netflix series House of Cards, which for a time was actually quite watchable. It was decliningly so in the recent years, but then we saw Kevin Spacey really just vanish. I mean, one of the most chilling things that happened was he was literally recast and replaced in a movie that had already been filmed. Now, Christopher Plummer did a bang-up job in that, but it doesn't exactly change that this guy was the poster boy for cancellation in that time. Now, was it justified or was it not? Well, as of just a couple of weeks ago, he has now been exonerated in his second country, cleared of all charges in the United Kingdom in a trial that was covered quite extensively by a number of media outlets, but none more than by the husband-wife duo Phelim McAleer and Anne McElhinney, which between the two of them have a tremendous knack for taking judicial proceedings and bringing them to life. They ran a phenomenal podcast called Kevin Spacey Trial, Unfiltered. You can catch all the episodes at kevinspaceypodcast.com. Phelim McAleer joins me now. Phelim, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. Always a pleasure.
So, I mean, you and I have spoken in the past, and you have done a tremendous job in so many different avenues of bringing these court cases and proceedings to life here. Why was this one that you wanted to get your hands on?
Good question. Actually, I read about, we focused a lot on his previous trial in New York, and I read about it in an obscure legal journal where the journalist interviewed the lawyers, and it was lawyers talking about it, not journalists. Funny, and the guy wasn't a proper journalist, so therefore he wasn't polluted. Therefore he didn't have to put a spin on it. And I was looking at him going, no, that couldn't be true. That couldn't be true. No, that couldn't be true. I mean, this case went to trial, and the more I read it, I realized this is mob justice. This is and it's also the politicization of justice. This is justice beholden to a political movement and prosecuting and persecuting people for political reasons, not for judicial reasons. And, as I say, they started with Spacey. They're coming for you. They're coming for someone you love, or they're coming for you next. And, this is part of you can almost draw a line from Spacey to Trump about how we've allowed justice to become more and more politicized and more ludicrous. And the media don't seem to care because it's coming for their enemies.
The Kevin Spacey allegations, I mean, they go back now so long, people can go back and read them all for themselves, but we had a range there. I mean, there were some very serious ones from the actor Anthony Rapp. There were allegations of groping, of just in general creepy conduct. And as I was saying in my preamble there's a range of things that all tend to be viewed in the same way here. And, the one thing when I look at this, that as far as Me Too casualties go, there were people that did things that were wrong but weren't necessarily illegal, and people that I don't actually think did anything wrong at all. Which camp would you put Kevin Spacey in? Is this a guy that, the stuff he did was bad but didn't cross an illegal threshold, or do you think he was actually dealt an unfair hand from the get-go and wasn't even really guilty of what he was being accused of?
He was completely not guilty of anything he was accused of. This wasn't, as you say, mission creep. This was false allegations, and that's a big thing to say, right? But nobody knows this case better than I do, except I would suspect Kevin Spacey. I can quite clearly say. And by the way, it's not me speaking. The jury agreed with me. The Anthony Rapp case, BuzzFeed News, just after they'd published the Steele dossier, by the way, BuzzFeed News ran with this story about Kevin Spacey. He was cancelled. Anthony Rapp sued him 4 years later for $40 million. 2 weeks' evidence in a Manhattan courtroom with a liberal Manhattan jury. They took 45 minutes to exonerate him. And I don't know if you've ever served on a jury. It takes 15 minutes to order the lunch, 15 minutes to nominate a foreman, and then they decide, what are we going to do with this? They literally all went, not guilty, and let's go home. That is how strong the evidence wasn't in the Anthony Rapp case. Similarly in London, I mean, there was a couple of the charges, and I was thinking, not only are they probably false, but even if they were true, they shouldn't be in a court of law.
One of the things I found interesting, and I didn't see this reported anywhere but in your coverage, is that Kevin Spacey had, for whatever reason, this obsessive hoarding of documents and records to the point where he was able to produce like a cell phone that he used 20 years ago in England, which was used in some ways to exonerate him. And often, I mean, that's in a case that's a he said case, or a he said, she said case, whichever it is, no one has any evidence, but he actually had the receipts, as the expression says.
Well, see, he literally had the receipts. I mean, the statute of limitations are there for a reason, and very interesting. They changed the statute of limitations in New York so Anthony Rapp could sue Kevin Spacey. And then they used that to go after Trump. E. Jean Carroll used that to go after Trump. Classic example of, let's change the law so that child abuse victims can get justice, and then we go after our enemies using this new law. Kevin Spacey, who can defend themselves against 35-year-old allegations from 1986, where it's alleged this happened and you were there and at this particular moment in time when that happened? Kevin Spacey is one of the few people in an ugly, disgusting, appalling storage warehouse. Now, I'm not a storage locker, a storage warehouse. Kevin Spacey, and I've seen the photographs of it, hundreds of cardboard boxes, not even the nice plastic ones you buy in Target or whatever. These are just boxes that he picked up over the years. Every document, every receipt, every bill, every invoice, every letter, even the envelopes of the letter. So Kevin Spacey in New York was able to prove, Anthony Rapp said he was at a party. He retreated to a bedroom to watch TV. Spacey, after the party, came, stood in the bedroom door, attacked him. He wriggled out. Spacey was able to prove he lived in a studio apartment. There was no bedroom. There could be no bedroom for Anthony Rapp to retreat to. There could be no bedroom door for Kevin Spacey to stand in menacingly. There could be no wriggling past the doorway. So then, fast forward to the London case. This guy said, I was sexually assaulted, and it was a serious sexual assault. 10 years was the sentence. At 4:30 in the morning, I woke up and this was happening. Kevin Spacey said, no, we had a consensual encounter. He freaked out afterwards at 11:30 at night, left in a hurry. I phoned him, worried about him. We had a conversation, he assured me, and we communicated after that for several months. So there's two different versions of events. Kevin Spacey at the bottom, and the guy says, I can't remember my phone number from 2003, so I can't give you the bills, I can't give you anything. Kevin Spacey at the bottom of one of these boxes found this phone, this British phone from 2003. He also managed to get his phone bills from 2003, and that showed a phone call between him and this guy at 11:30 that lasted 1 minute. As they called it, the bus stop phone call. The guy was at the bus stop getting a bus going home, and Spacey phoned him to make sure he was okay. There was no phone call between him between the two of them at 11:30. There was nothing. It got to the stage where the prosecution, I kid you not, the prosecution said the way this phone call can be explained was that it was an accidental dial by Spacey, right? The complainant said, asked to explain all the text messages between him and Spacey afterwards, said, I think that when Spacey assaulted me, he installed malware on my phone to make it look like we would be texting in the future. So not only is Kevin Spacey...
This was in 2003, right?
2003, Kevin Spacey, who knew, Oscar-winning actor, super predator, and tech nerd, who can install malware on a 2003 phone, in the obvious event that in 20 years' time, he's going to be accused of sexually assaulting him and needs an alibi. You know, this is the kind of nonsense that the jury had to endure but by the way, very little of this was printed in the mainstream media. They printed the allegations, the Me Too allegations, and their pens and laptops went silent during the ludicrous evidence that came out for the defense. I mean, the Spacey's barrister was just fantastic. I mean, I can't remember his name, but we called him Sir Buffton Tufton, QFC, FC, BBC, RSPCA, KC. He was just one of these classic English barristers, probably about 110, And there was one incident where, he said, now in complainant number 3, I want you all to, members of the jury, to remember four features. And we're all going, 4 features, truth, justice, whatever, And he goes, 4 features are, and in order of importance, Guinness, tequila, Jägermeister, and wine. Because they'd been on an all-day drinking session, and the guy admitted to having 6 or 7 Guinness, right? And I, it's a long time since I had a drink, but back when I did, I know when I said I had 6 or 7 Guinness, that means I had 9 or 10 Guinness, So he was completely drunk, and then he went home to Spacey's and drank some weed, and they had a little kiss, and Spacey, when he said I'm not gay, Spacey backed off, and that was the charge. And it's like, it shouldn't have been brought to court anyway. But the evidence then showed that this didn't. I mean, it was ludicrous, some of the charges. And the jury.
So, I mean, that right there that you bring up is something we saw in other cases where, men who thought that a date was going one way and, tried to make a pass and were rebuffed and stopped it, were being accused of having committed some heinous sex crime. And I think in some cases that was when even some of the people that were all in on the Me Too movement, not all, some started to back up and say, okay, maybe we've pushed this too far. I remember one of them that came up was this comedian in the US, Aziz Ansari, who was basically accused of just having an awkward date and was the subject of an attempt to dismantle his career. But the fact that even got to trial, even after we've had some time to look back and say, okay, maybe we can lower the temperature on this. I mean, why was that charge ever made in the first place?
I think they knew the quality was bad, so they were going for the quantity. And you get this with some cases sometimes. Juries will say, no smoke without fire. We'll clear him on all of these, but convict him on that. And they were hoping for that. I mean, it was ludicrous. So Spacey, Spacey, I think, agrees. Yeah, the guy let Spacey's dog out of a room. It's a long story. And the guy said, I'm really sorry. And Spacey says, oh, no problem. Give me a hug. After 6 Guinness, 3 Jägermeister, 2 tequila, and several glasses of wine and a joint, they hugged, right? Spacey says, and I agree, kissed him twice on the neck in the hug. And now there's a dispute whether Spacey also touched him. But even the guy says the touch was 2 out of 10, right? And the guy said, I don't bat for that team. He said Spacey pulled back with a look of panic in his eyes, left immediately and went to another room and closed the door. The classic bad pass, right? And it's like, what is this doing in a court of law? The guy, it was a running joke between him and his mates, right? For years afterwards, until he said, and then, I mean, this guy, then this is the Jägermeister guy. He said, Sir Buffton Tufton, the QC or KC, said to him, have you ever corresponded with Mr. Spacey? I don't recall. I was going, that's a really funny answer. I don't recall. Have you ever written to him through his website? I don't recall. I'm going, okay. So it turns out at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, now not 3 a.m. after a feed a drink, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, he wrote to kevinspacey.com and said, I'm willing to withdraw from court case in return for a settlement. Right? And it's like, and we're hearing from this guy. This is the guy who should be charged with extortion, rather than having Kevin Spacey in a glass dock in the horrible Southwark Crown Court, facing years in prison.
So the challenge here is that, as you and Anne have noted, Kevin Spacey has been exonerated in 2 countries and 2 courts. He has yet to have had any allegation against him stick. But I don't believe there will be any reversal of the career damage and the reputational damage. I mean, I don't think Netflix is going to be calling him up and saying, I'm so sorry, we'd like to include you in the House of Cards reboot. I don't believe that, All the Money in the World Part 2 is going to, replace Christopher Plummer with Kevin Spacey. So is there a bittersweet aspect to this where, yes, you have justice, but not really?
I think it's just a bitter aspect to it. I mean, it's terrible. And, this is when you hear about all these producers and all these studios complain about their finances and actors, look, who wouldn't want to see a show with Kevin Spacey in it now? Maybe a show about a man wrongly accused of something, but they don't have the imagination, they don't have the courage. I mean, when you think about it, cutting Spacey out of All the Money in the World, it was Stalin-esque. That's what Stalin used to do against his enemies. Replace them from the photographs or remove them. Before Photoshop was a thing, he was able to do that. So, I don't think, no, I don't, I mean, I just find it hard to believe now that he will regain his career, will regain his place in society. I just can't see it. No, and why not? I mean, just to correct you there, Andrew, he's been exonerated in 3 courts in 2 continents. I mean, there was the New York one, which took 45 minutes. I mean, the other one in Nantucket, which we devoted an episode to in our podcast. Yes, I mean, when you have the complainant pleading the fifth because the judge just warned him he could be charged with tampering with evidence, right? When you have the complainant pleading the fifth, the charges are wrong. The only person likely facing criminal charges after the Nantucket case was the complainant and his mother, right? So exonerated. I mean, that's one step beyond exoneration. Imagine the jury says you're not guilty. They didn't even get to court. The judge says you're not guilty. The prosecutor says you're not guilty, and we're thinking about charging the complainant with tampering with evidence. So you couldn't ask for a more exoneration, if that's the right phrase. But no, it's a bitter for Kevin Spacey, because I think he's not going to get anything back.
The one thing that is so difficult for anyone that's ever been canceled, they all say something very similar to this, is when they get their friends who believe that all the stuff is nonsense but want nothing to do with them because they're worried about their reputation. And this is something that we see anytime someone has been canceled, the quiet allies, the quiet supporters. It was actually quite pleasing and quite moving to see Elton John, who has a lot to lose in his career, if he were to get canceled and tarnished, actually take a stand as a defense witness for Kevin Spacey. And I read a piece that you and Anne wrote in Spiked, and that actually carries a huge amount of weight in the United Kingdom when you've got Sir Elton John on your side.
Sir Elton John. I mean, so I was sitting there in the courtroom, and the background was this guy was saying, I was a driver for Elton John and did security for him. And the barrister said, I put it to you, Sir Buffton Tufton said, Casey, I put it to you that you did not ever drive. And I thought, so I went out of the courtroom and I literally phoned a friend of mine who's a barrister. And I said, when he said that, does that mean Elton John's going to give evidence? And he says, they wouldn't have said it if they couldn't prove it. He says, if I was the prosecutor there, I would do everything I could to stop Elton John setting foot in that courtroom. If Elton John says you are innocent, it's like the Queen Mother saying you're innocent, right? If he rides to your defense. And, you know, and so, but that's what happened there. He did video link in. And funny thing is, he didn't, his evidence was quite technical, actually. He didn't say Kevin Spacey is innocent. But he stood up and he took the time out of his schedule. And Elton John has this national treasure status in the UK, which is a lot to lose.
Well, international.
Yeah, international. So, that's a lot to lose. Like that takes tremendous courage, because you're actually risking, you know, beatification that you've had to stand up for this guy. Who, by the way, it wouldn't matter if you didn't stand up for him. No one. But obviously he had some kind of sense of duty to tell the truth, and his truth. It wasn't. He didn't stand up and say Kevin Spacey. It was funny. His evidence was very technical. Kevin Spacey did not come to my house on that day. He was not at this party. We have no evidence of that. This guy never drove for me. He never was security for me. Now it meant that the biggest assault, one of the biggest assaults Spacey was charged with, could not physically have happened. That's what his evidence said there. And he also, it helped characterize the complainant as an exaggerator or fantasist. But it was very factual and very narrow. So, yeah, I mean, I happen to know, I've never spoken to Kevin Spacey, but I've spoken to people around him. Not, you know, and I asked about, was there anyone who'd like to come on the podcast, any of his friends or anything like that? And the answer was, all of his friends have deserted him.
So he did lose everything in that sense. And you weren't even getting the sense that there were people that were still around him but were kind of keeping quiet. You were hearing that they all bolted.
Yes. And he said in court that he's running out of money too. Now, and I assume, you would think he hasn't, but I assume he wouldn't lie about something like that because it's provable. Yeah, he's running out of money, and it's second-hand, it's not first-hand information. It could even be third-hand that the friends have deserted him.
Mm-hmm. But even on the money, I mean, you know, certainly in the United States, the cost of defending yourself is astronomical. In the United Kingdom, I mean, this was a weeks-long trial. And no matter how shrewd you are an investor and how many millions you've made, it can go away overnight, especially if you're talking about a guy that hasn't really been cast in anything in now 9 years.
Yeah. Well, the trial in the UK, I think, was 3 to 4 weeks, right? The trial in the US, Anthony Rapp, was 2 weeks. The Nantucket one was a week of pre-trial. And, you know, I spoke to one of the lawyers who defended him. And I said, how much work have you... Because this guy has an encyclopedic knowledge. Now, some ways it was worth it. He said thousands of hours. Now, I don't know, these guys, what do they get, $1,000 an hour, $1,500 an hour? We're talking millions here. We're talking millions. And that's just for one lawyer. And, you know, this is all after-tax money, and apparently Netflix sued him and got a lot of money back off him and all this. And, you know, things, as you say, when there's not, you know, what's the Dickens character said, you know, incomings versus outgoings, you know, that's when the trouble starts. And there's no incomings, and there's a lot of outgoings.
I know you've spent a lot of time in Hollywood and have fortunately kept your sanity intact throughout that. But I'm curious, Phelim, what your sense is on kind of the mood there now versus in 2014. Because in 2014, when the Me Too wave kept in, I stand by that there were people that I think very much deserved what they got. And that doesn't mean I thought the process itself was appropriate, but I think the outcome might have been. And I think that right there is the distinction, is that a lot of people right now do not care about process. And I'm wondering if you think there's been a bit of regret about that, or have people just sort of closed the book and moved on and said what happened happened?
Well, I think it was Me Too was it 2017 or was it 2016? It was a bit later. But look, I have sensed no regret at all. All I'm getting is people saying, "Thank God you're doing this. We knew it was a load of nonsense all along," right? So there's, for those who went all in, no regret. For those who kept quiet, they're secretly glad we're doing this, right? But I've yet to meet. Now we do get emails from members of the public who thank us for this because they just bought the story as well. But no, at that upper elite level, there's no regret. Look, we always said this when we used to cover the environmental movement. They would have a scare every 5 years. This is going to give us cancer. That and it would always be proven wrong. But being an environmentalist means never having to say you're sorry. And I think being an elite Hollywood hypocrite means never having to say you're sorry. Also, who's going to call you out on it? What's the gain? But it's not even that self-interested. It's that self-deluded. They don't think there's anything to be sorry for funny enough, until it comes for someone they know. And that's really what damaged the Me Too movement was when they came for us in Cuomo, and Cuomo wrote to his friends in Hollywood and said, help, and they helped him, and then the emails came out. I think it was the leadership of the Me Too movement helped him because, hey, it's Andrew Cuomo. We know he wouldn't do that. And I'm going, well, would you ever think that applying that strict rigor of proof and all that and due process to all the other people whose lives you've ruined?
Yeah, I know, and you're right, and I apologize for mixing up the date. For whatever reason, I had 2014 burned into my mind, but it was 2017, so we're talking about 6 years, so amend any time I've mentioned nearly a decade to that, but I think everything else still stands, and your point about Cuomo is a valid one. I mean, the way that Believe All Women, which was the refrain of 2017, evaporated when Tara Reid accused Joe Biden of sexual wrongdoing, and then it was Joe Biden. I remember there was that one press conference he gave where he had to explain, no, I said we should we shouldn't just, but he couldn't explain how his position had changed when he was the guy being accused of this. And again, Bill Clinton, if the standard applied to Donald Trump was applied to Bill Clinton, the guy would be in prison right now.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, there's no reckoning in Hollywood. There's no sense of embarrassment. Because the mainstream media haven't covered this, and they haven't covered the implications for Kevin Spacey being exonerated in 3 courts in 2 jurisdictions. And I think this is the end of it. And I mean, if you listen to the podcast, if you listen to the Anthony Rapp podcast, it was corrupt journalism colluding with false allegations to get a story and destroyed that man's life. And Anthony Rapp is now a major international activist / actor. The journalist went from BuzzFeed, he's now a senior writer in Variety. Everyone's done very well out of it. And a jury took 45 minutes to order lunch, arrange a foreman, and exonerate him. So there's not much grounds for optimism.
Now, I don't want you to give away anything too much if you have plans, because you already always have plans for something or other, but do you think this could warrant the fictionalized treatment or the dramatized treatment that some of your other projects have, this trial?
It's funny, a very, very, very prominent Hollywood producer reached out to us, right? Someone had sent him the podcast. And we got all excited, right? Because we thought, I mean, if you listen to the it's unbelievable. Kevin Spacey was saved by a dream, right? So he didn't know when it happened. He couldn't remember. He was an itinerant actor at the time, 1986, moving from sublease to sublease, trying to get the cheapest place to stay in New York. He didn't know where he was staying. He had a dream that he was living in a studio. I kid you not. And it's all in an email. I've got the email that was part of the court documents. He says, I was living in a studio at that time. Oh, that studio. He then went to his boxes and found the floor plan, found the lease, found letters that he had written to his mother about his studio apartment. No bedroom, nothing. Then secret emails between the journalist and Anthony Rapp emerged, where Anthony Rapp got things really, really wrong. And the journalist said, we can't print this because it's wrong. So what we'll do is we'll disguise what you said, or we'll not print it. So the journalist...
So they were running interference quite openly for
yes.
allegations that even they saw weren't necessarily accurate.
Yes. Yeah, not openly colluding before the story was published, right? They realized his story was filled with errors and inconsistencies, so they just didn't publish those. Or at one stage, the journalist sent an email saying, "We'll keep the story deliberately vague in that respect, so Spacey can't refute it." Right? That's an actual email between the journalist and the interviewee, and I mean, it's a great story, and I thought we got all excited. Because we thought this guy has spotted that potential, wants to option it, whatever. And we spoke to him, and he said, beautiful podcast, loved it. It's an amazing story. I said, is there a movie in it? He said, too soon. And I'm going, that to me, that means I should do it now, right?
You have to wait until no one cares about it enough to be mad to do it, apparently.
Yes. Yeah, and it's now is exactly the time to do this amazing story. It's filled with Hollywood twists and subplots. I mean, the people in Nantucket, the complainant in Nantucket, deleted texts from his phone, and when Spacey's team said we need to get into this phone, they said, we don't have it. The police don't have it. The police got into court and said, I swear to God, I gave the phone to the complainant's father, and I'm the guy who gave it, and his father looks like this, and this is what he was wearing that day. And the complainant's father got up and says, I have no memory of this. And I'm going, so they took the phone, and, who knows? And then that's when they were said, you need to be aware of the facts of perjury and tampering with evidence. And that's when they said, we're pleading the fifth. So it's a great, there's some more twists and turns in a proper Hollywood movie. We would love to do it. And when someone says to me it's too soon, that means it should be done right now.
Well, you might even be able to get Kevin Spacey to play himself at this point.
Wouldn't that be the best part of stunt casting? Actually, the best bit would be to get Kevin Spacey to play one of his complainants.
Yeah, well, apparently he checks the emails sent to his website, so you should send your email along there and...
I swear to God, the guy literally, there's a thing called kevinspacey.com, and the guy went on to Kevin Spacey, and there's a button, contact us, and he wrote it, and it got to Kevin Spacey. So just a word to everyone out there, go to Kevin Spacey. If you want to send a message to Kevin Spacey, go to kevinspacey.com. He reads them all.
Yeah, and tell him to reach out to Phelim McAleer whenever he puts together what I hope we can get cooking here. Well, listen, it was a tremendous project, as could be expected. The trial is over, but you can listen to the podcast narrated by Phelim's lovely wife, Anne McElhinney, at kevinspaceypodcast.com. And you should also look up the Gosnell movie, which I know we have a lot of members of the pro-life community who watch and listen to this show. A tremendous, tremendous film if you haven't already seen it. Again, very much bringing a real-life event and series of events that are put on the screen in a way that is both respectful and entertaining. So, Phelim McAleer, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Andrew. Always a pleasure to come on your show as well. Thank you.
That was Phelim McAleer, half of the powerhouse duo that is Phelim McAleer and Anne McElhinney. As I mentioned, you can check out that podcast at kevinspaceypodcast.com. That's it for me. We will be back on Tuesday with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.